There's a paradox at the heart of the Russian economy right now that economists are struggling to explain to policymakers. On the surface, Russia appears to be thriving despite the most comprehensive sanctions regime ever imposed on a major economy. GDP growth is positive. Unemployment is at historic lows. Government revenues are flowing. Military production is surging. The economic collapse that Western sanctions were supposed to trigger never materialized. But beneath that surface, something dangerous is building. Russia's economy isn't just growing. It's overheating. It's straining against fundamental limits that no amount of government spending or central bank intervention can overcome. And those limits, when they're finally hit, could trigger financial stress severe enough to disrupt global energy markets and create ripple effects far beyond Russia's borders. This isn't about sanctions finally working the way they were supposed to. This is about something more fundamental. Russia has pushed its economy into a wartime configuration that's unsustainable over the medium term. They're running it too hot, too fast, with too few workers and too much money, chasing too few goods. And the stress points are accumulating in ways that suggest something has to break. Let me walk you through exactly what's happening inside the Russian economy, why the apparent strength is actually fragility, and why the breaking point, when it comes, could send shockwaves through global energy markets that affect prices from Texas to Tokyo. Because once you understand the mechanics of what's breaking and why Russia's options for managing it are so limited, you'll realize we're watching a slow-motion crisis that could accelerate suddenly. Here's the foundation. After the invasion of Ukraine, Russia's economy contracted sharply in 2022. Sanctions hit, Western companies left, technology imports were restricted, financial systems were disrupted, the ruble collapsed. Most economists predicted deep, prolonged recession, but Russia adapted faster than expected. They found alternative markets for oil and gas, selling to China and India at discounts. They replaced Western imports with Chinese, Turkish, and domestic substitutes. They mobilized domestic production for military needs. The government spent massively to sustain the economy and fund the war. And it worked in the short term. The economy stabilized and even grew. But that stabilization came at a cost that's now becoming apparent. Russia essentially shifted to a wartime economy. Government spending exploded, particularly on military production and related industries. Defense spending now consumes over 6% of GDP officially, likely higher in reality. Tens of thousands of workers moved into military production, munitions factories, equipment manufacturing. This created economic growth, but it's a specific, distorted kind of growth. Resources are flowing into producing weapons that get destroyed in Ukraine. That's economic activity that shows up in GDP statistics, but it doesn't improve living standards or create sustainable prosperity. It's like a car factory running full capacity to produce cars that are immediately driven into a wall. Lots of activity, no lasting value. And the military production surge has created a labor shortage crisis that's now constraining the entire economy. Here's how this works. Russia's working age population was already declining due to demographics. Low birth rates in the 1990s mean fewer workers entering the labor force now. Then hundreds of thousands of men left Russia to avoid mobilization. Hundreds of thousands more were mobilized into the military. Casualties, though Russia doesn't publish accurate figures, have removed more workers. Simultaneously, military production ramped up, absorbing hundreds of thousands of workers. The result, Russia now has severe labor shortages across nearly every sector of the economy. Unemployment is under 3%, the lowest in decades. That sounds positive, but it's actually a sign of dangerous overheating. When unemployment is that low, every business struggles to find workers. Wages rise rapidly as companies compete for scarce labor. Inflation accelerates. Production is constrained not by demand or capital, but by simple lack of workers. This is a hard limit that government spending can't overcome. And here's where it gets dangerous. The Russian central bank has responded to inflation by raising interest rates. The key rate now stands at 21%, among the highest in the world for a major economy. This is supposed to cool inflation by making borrowing expensive and encouraging saving over spending. But it's not working as intended. Why? Because the government continues spending massively on the war. That government spending injects money into the economy faster than high interest rates can drain it out. The central bank is trying to cool the economy while the government is heating it up. They're working at cross purposes. High interest rates create their own problems. Russian businesses, particularly small and medium enterprises, can't afford to borrow at 21%. Investment in civilian industries collapses. Construction projects stall. Equipment upgrades are postponed. The non-military economy contracts even while military production surges. This creates a deeply distorted economy. Military sectors boom. Consumer sectors struggle. Investment collapses. Inflation remains high despite punishing interest rates. And the government can't easily change course because the war requires sustained military spending. Now let me explain why this matters for global energy markets, because Russia's internal economic stress has direct implications for oil and gas production and exports. Russia's oil production has remained relatively stable despite sanctions, around 9 to 10 million barrels per day. They've redirected exports from Europe to Asia. They've used shadow fleets of tankers to evade restrictions. They've found buyers willing to purchase at discounts. Oil revenues, though reduced from pre-war levels, remain substantial and critical for government finances. But maintaining this production requires continuous investment. Oil fields decline naturally without ongoing drilling and maintenance. Siberian fields, where most Russian oil comes from, operate in harsh conditions requiring sophisticated technology and constant attention. Equipment breaks down. Wells need maintenance. Production capacity degrades without sustained investment. Here's the problem. Russian oil companies face 21% interest rates for domestic borrowing. Western technology and equipment are sanctioned and unavailable. Chinese alternatives exist but are more expensive and less capable. The skilled workforce is being pulled into military production. The combination means investment in oil production is declining. You don't see the effects immediately. Existing wells keep producing, but gradually production capacity erodes. Wells that should be drilled aren't. Maintenance that should happen gets deferred. Technology upgrades are postponed. The decline is slow but cumulative. Russian energy officials know this. They're watching production metrics and seeing warning signs. Decline rates are increasing. New project development is slowing. The technology gap with Western operators is widening as Russia can't access advanced drilling techniques, enhanced recovery methods, or sophisticated monitoring systems. The stress point is this: Russia needs oil revenue to fund the war and sustain the economy. But the economic conditions created by the war, high interest rates, labor shortages, technology restrictions, are undermining the oil sector's ability to maintain production over the medium term. In the near term, 2025 and 2026, production likely remains stable. But looking toward 2027 and beyond, without changes in policy or conditions, Russian oil production could start declining meaningfully, not catastrophically, but perhaps 500,000 to 1 million barrels per day, maybe more if conditions deteriorate. Now, why does this matter globally? Because Russia is the world's third largest oil producer and second largest exporter. A production decline of even 500,000 barrels per day would tighten global oil markets. Prices would rise. If the decline is larger or happens faster, the impact would be more severe. OPEC could increase production to compensate, but their spare capacity is limited. American shale producers could ramp up, but they face their own constraints. A meaningful decline in Russian production would likely mean structurally higher oil prices globally. And it's not just oil. Russia is the world's largest natural gas exporter. The dynamics are similar. Gas fields require continuous investment. Without it, production declines. Russia has redirected some gas exports from Europe to Asia, but pipeline infrastructure limits how much can be redirected. European gas imports from Russia have collapsed, but Russia can't easily replace that revenue by selling elsewhere. Russian gas production is already declining. Investment in new fields is limited. The situation is worse than oil because gas infrastructure is even more capital intensive and technology dependent. If Russian gas production declines significantly, global LNG markets tighten further. European dependence on expensive LNG imports increases. Asian markets face higher prices. Energy costs rise globally. This is the financial stress point that could shake global energy markets. Not an immediate crisis, but a building pressure that manifests over the next few years as Russian energy production capacity erodes due to the economic distortions created by wartime spending, high interest rates, and technology restrictions. Let me give you another dimension of Russia's economic stress: inflation and currency instability. Despite 21% interest rates, Russian inflation is running around 8 to 9%, well above the central bank's target. This reflects the fundamental imbalance between massive government spending and limited productive capacity. The ruble has been volatile, at times weakening significantly despite high interest rates. This creates a dilemma. A weak ruble makes imports expensive, feeding inflation, but a strong ruble reduces the ruble value of oil export revenues, which are denominated in dollars and euros. Russia needs the ruble weak enough to maximize budget revenues, but strong enough to control import costs. Managing this balance is increasingly difficult. Currency weakness also makes it harder to import the technology and equipment Russia needs for energy production. Even when items are available from China or other suppliers, a weak ruble makes them prohibitively expensive. Now let me explain why Russia's options for managing these stresses are so limited, because this is what makes the situation potentially critical. Option 1, reduce government spending to ease inflation and allow interest rate cuts. But this means cutting military spending, which means reducing the war effort. Politically, Putin can't easily do this without admitting the war is unsustainable. So this option is largely off the table. Option 2, accept high inflation and cut interest rates anyway to support civilian economy. But this risks spiraling inflation and currency collapse. The central bank resists this because the consequences could be catastrophic. Russia remembers the 1990s hyperinflation. They're terrified of repeating it. Option 3, increase oil and gas production to generate more revenue and ease budget pressures. But as I've explained, the economic conditions make this very difficult. Investment is constrained, technology is limited, labor is scarce. Option 4, mobilize more workers for civilian production to ease labor shortages. But this means either mobilizing more men for the military, removing them from the workforce, or it means ending the war and demobilizing, freeing up workers. The first worsens the problem. The second requires ending the war. Option 5, negotiate an end to the war, allowing the economy to normalize. This is the obvious solution economically, but politically it requires Putin to accept something less than victory, which creates its own risks to his position. Russia is trapped. The economic configuration that allowed them to sustain the war in 2023 and 2024 is hitting limits. Continuing current policies means accumulating stress that eventually breaks something. But changing policies means either accepting defeat or risking economic chaos. Let me give you the human dimension of what this economic stress means inside Russia, because the pressure isn't just in statistics. There's a small business owner in Yekaterinburg who runs a construction company. He can't get loans because 21% interest rates make borrowing impossible. He can't find workers because they've moved to military factories where wages are higher. His costs are rising because inflation makes materials expensive. His business is slowly failing, not because of sanctions directly, but because of the economic distortions the war has created. Or consider a pensioner in St. Petersburg living on a fixed income. Inflation is eroding her purchasing power. Prices for food, utilities, basic goods are all rising. Her pension adjusts slowly. Her standard of living is declining month by month. She's experiencing the cost of economic overheating, even though official statistics show growth. These individual stresses accumulate into social pressure. People are suffering economically despite official claims of success. Eventually, this creates political pressure that even authoritarian systems must respond to. Now, let me address what happens when Russia hits these limits more severely. Several scenarios are possible. Scenario 1, gradual adjustment. Russia slowly reduces military spending, accepts a negotiated end to the war, and allows the economy to rebalance. This is the best outcome, but requires political developments that aren't clearly visible yet. Scenario 2. Economic crisis forces policy change. Inflation spirals, the ruble collapses, or some other financial stress becomes so severe that Russia is forced to change course dramatically. This could mean emergency measures, currency controls, capital restrictions, or even political instability. Scenario 3. Energy production decline accelerates. Russian oil and gas output falls faster than expected due to underinvestment and technical problems. This would reduce government revenue, worsening fiscal problems, while simultaneously tightening global energy markets and raising prices. Scenario 4. Russia muddles through, accepting lower living standards and economic distortion indefinitely. The economy remains in a degraded state, neither collapsing nor recovering, just operating at a lower level with ongoing stress. Each scenario has different implications for global energy markets. A negotiated end to the war and economic normalization would likely mean increased Russian energy production over time, easing global markets. An economic crisis could disrupt production unpredictably. A gradual production decline would mean structurally tighter markets and higher prices. Muddling through means ongoing uncertainty. I've studied resource-based economies and the intersection of geopolitics and energy markets for decades. I've analyzed how economic stress in producer nations affects global commodity markets. And I can tell you this: Russia's current situation is unsustainable over the medium term. The combination of wartime spending, labor shortages, high interest rates, technology restrictions, and declining investment in energy production creates stresses that will eventually force adjustment. The question isn't whether Russia hits limits. The question is when and how severely. For global energy markets, this matters enormously. Russia is too large a producer for problems there not to affect global prices. If Russian production declines even modestly, markets tighten. If the decline is more severe or combined with disruptions elsewhere, oil and gas prices could spike significantly. Energy importers, including Europe, the United States, and Asian nations, need to prepare for scenarios where Russian energy production is meaningfully lower than current levels. This means ensuring alternative supplies, building strategic reserves, and accepting that energy costs may be structurally higher than in the pre-war period. The financial stress point in Russia's economy is building. The expansion driven by wartime spending is hitting fundamental limits of labor, capital, and productivity. The overheating can't continue indefinitely without something breaking. And when something breaks in the economy of the world's largest gas exporter and third largest oil producer, the shockwaves reach every energy market globally. Russia's economy isn't collapsing, but it's straining against limits that can't be overcome without fundamental policy changes that Russia seems unable or unwilling to make. The stress is building, the limits are approaching, and global energy markets are potentially exposed to disruptions that most current forecasts don't adequately account for. This is the paradox. Russia's apparent economic success is actually fragility. The growth is unsustainable. The stability is temporary. And the financial stress point, when it's reached, could shake global energy markets in ways that affect prices and supply security worldwide. The question isn't if Russia hits economic limits. The question is when and whether the adjustment is managed or chaotic. And for global energy markets, the answer to that question could mean the difference between stable prices and another energy shock. Russia's economy is hitting limits. The stress is building. And the world should be paying very close attention, because what happens next in Moscow could reshape energy markets from Houston to Shanghai. And right now, the trajectory isn't sustainable. Something will have to give. The only question is what breaks first and how hard the impact reverberates across global markets.